Villains come in a variety of different forms, each of which having their own strengths and weaknesses in terms of storytelling. There are iconic powerhouses like Frieza, calculated geniuses like Aizen, legendary historical figures like Madara Uchiha, and genuinely nice guys who do nothing wrong like Griffith. However, out of all the different tropes of villains, my favorite tend to be the ones who have a development in their morality and humanity, be it for better or worse. This growth, more often than not, helps characters feel more three-dimensional and less like just stagnant obstacles. Say what you want about Frieza in Dragon Ball Z, but I think it's pretty hard to argue for the idea that he was a complex character. From the moment that he shows up on screen, he is this force of destruction who is ruthless and terrifying and self-important and really fun to watch. He's introduced as a conquering dictator who destroys any planet that opposes him, and at the end of the Namek saga, well, he's still all of those things. There's no real development and there's no real change in who he is as a person other than we know he's not invincible anymore. Everything that was great about him is now missing. I'm not saying that this makes Frieza a bad character. In fact, the pure evil powerhouse that he was plays amazingly well in contrast to the pure good powerhouse that Goku is. However, in the grand scheme of things, I rarely look back at Frieza from Dragon Ball Z and think of him as one of my favorite villains in anime because he just wasn't that interesting on his own. Is he cool as hell? Definitely. But is there much beyond the surface? Well, not at all. And that's why when I think of Frieza's great moments in DBZ, I think of Goku growing and becoming a Super Saiyan in their fight. And in contrast, when I think of him in Dragon Ball Super, I think of him actively making decisions to help or betray those around him. There's a slightly higher level of complexity in his character in Super than there was in Dragon Ball Z. All of this to basically say, cool characters are cool, but villains with deeper themes and development of their morals are often more interesting to me. And that's why today we're going to be talking about just that. Specifically in this video, I'm going to be discussing a small spectrum of villains who show a change in their humanity, mainly referring to their empathy, level of compassion, and general ability to not be a douchebag. The first of which will be one of my favorite examples of loss of humanity. In the late 19th century, a child was born to an abusive alcoholic in England. This child spent 12 years living with his father, constantly being abused and beaten, until eventually he grew tired of being treated like garbage and poisoned his father. Luckily, a rich man named George Joestar I was indebted to the child's father, and as one last favor, George would go on to adopt the child and raise him with all the love and support that he would show his own son, and arguably even more. This was the moment that Dio Brando and the Joestar family's destinies became intertwined. Dio, who as I mentioned was abused by his father terribly, grew up learning to take care of himself and never consider the needs of others. From a very young age, the mentality of survival of the fittest was quite literally beat into him. And no matter what the cost, Dio convinced himself that he would not only survive, but he would rise above all others. As such, when he was adopted into the Joestar family, he almost immediately began plotting a way to inherit all of George's fortune for himself. To do this, he would need to get George's son Joseph out of the picture, and Dio's affinity for manipulation, dominance, and his overwhelming charisma would all be used to the fullest of his ability to humiliate, emotionally destroy, and break Joseph mentally. This included things like killing Joseph's dog, stealing the first kiss of the girl that Joseph loved, and generally beating the hell out of him whenever he could. However, the Joestars are known for their perseverance, and eventually all of Dio's plans fell apart. Dio genuinely believes that he is the way he is because of all the terrible things that happened to him while he was a child. This belief is so adamant and core in his character that as you watch, you even start to believe it yourself. So when you see Dio here at his wit's end, his life's work in shambles, well, despite the brutal and honestly evil behavior that he shows, we're still kind of sympathetic for him. It's almost as if his charisma isn't just limited to the characters in the JoJo's universe, but instead actually reach out into our own as well. You often find yourself rooting for Dio, waiting and excited for when he'll be on screen. And when things start to go well for him, you're almost hopeful that he can change. Do you have any idea how well written a character needs to be for them to be able to kick and then later burn a dog alive and still have a massive fan base? This guy is a monster, and everyone still loves him. And that all comes down to the writing style of JoJo's. Characters are flushed out expertly, so seeing Dio grow from a child who is beaten daily all the way to adulthood might not leave you being aligned with him. However, because you understand where he's coming from, you are somehow still enamored and almost supportive of him. However, things take a quick shift when Speedwagon calls Dio out on his bullshit, telling him that he isn't a product of a terrible childhood, but instead that he's just an evil person who was evil from birth. This shatters the illusion that Dio had of himself, and it's the exact moment when Dio decides to give into the dark, putting on the stone mask and more or less becoming an immortal vampire. He's actively making a choice to cast away his humanity, honestly in a more literal sense than the others in this video. With that being said though, what good has his humanity been for him? He grew up being abused by humans, taught to lie, cheat, and steal by the people around him, and when he's finally brought into a family who loved him, he was already so broken and unable to trust others that he couldn't embrace it for himself. He was still fully set on moving up in the world even though he was already doing pretty well for himself in the Joestar estate, and now he had missed his chance to appreciate that and no longer had a chance of becoming the heir to their fortune. So what was left? Humans were all trash and were all below him, so he might as well put all of his determination towards diving fully into becoming a monster and rising above everyone else who had looked down on him. Dio is the embodiment of greed, passion, and terrifying determination, showing us a man who will do anything and everything in his power to defeat those who stand in his way, even cast away his own humanity. Early on in Act 1, he's given nearly as much, if not more, screen time than Joseph, and for people watching for the first time, it's easy to believe that these two will overcome their differences and begin a journey as brothers. Hell, the show even leads you to believe that they're gonna get along while in school, working together successfully on the same rugby team. So when you see him double back and continue down this path of evil, it actually hits pretty hard for viewers. And I think that's what makes him such a great character. This arc that starts to bend towards the normal path that we see so often in anime, with rivals becoming friends, and instead sharply turns towards him becoming as close to the literal devil as possible. Now there's a whole other character arc for him after Phantom Blood, but for the sake of this video, I think we're just going to move on to the next topic. And since we just covered a human becoming a demon, let's move on to a demon becoming more human. About 500 years ago in feudal Japan, monsters and demons roamed the world and tormented humans. Among these, there was one who stood on an entirely different level and who wouldn't hesitate to wipe out an entire army of humans or demons alike just for being in his path. Sesshomaru from the Inuyasha series is introduced to us as Inuyasha's older brother. He has a level of confidence that makes Dio look humble, and honestly, in this world it's pretty well deserved. While almost always calm and collected, there are two things that he seems to be most disgusted by. The first is humans, who are weak, short-lived, and unfit to be in his presence. And this leads us to the second thing he hates, and that's half-breeds. In this world, occasionally humans and demons get it on and give birth to a half-breed, and the idea of a powerful demon lowering themselves to be with a human is pretty sickening to him. Which is why when his father, one of the most powerful demons in history, had a child with a human woman, he was a little bit confused and instantly started to hate his younger brother. What made this even worse was that his polluted sibling also seemed to love humans himself. And this is where his, less than friendly relationship with Inuyasha begins. With all that in mind, let me just simplify by saying that Sesshomaru is the demon. He's ruthless, powerful, incredibly smart, prideful, and, let's be honest, pretty damn good looking to boot. Not to mention his name even means destruction of life. I'd even go so far as to say that at the start of the series, he personifies what a demon should be much more than the main antagonist, Naraku. While Naraku might also be all the things that I just mentioned about Sesshomaru, there's just this different air and aura about them. Naraku oftentimes feels more like a strategist, rarely getting his hands dirty and always playing things safe. He more often than not gives off this feeling of being a very evil human, more so than a very evil demon, if that makes any sense. Sesshomaru, on the other hand, would and has walked into literal armies in the underworld without a moment's hesitation because he knows there is nothing in the world that would pose a threat to him. It's this level of dominance and confidence that just makes him feel so much more like a force of nature than just another demon. And now that we have a feeling for who he is, let's get into his role in the story. One of the first big interactions between Sesshomaru and Inuyasha comes at their father's tomb, where the two brothers fought over a sword left behind by their father. Sesshomaru had been left the Tenseiga, a sword which couldn't cut. However, on the other hand, Inuyasha had been left behind the Tetsaiga, a sword which could slay 100 demons in a single slice. As the Tetsaiga was much stronger at face value, Sesshomaru believed that he was the only one worthy to wield it. In this fight, Inuyasha ended up cutting off Sesshomaru's arm and winning the battle, forcing his older brother to retreat so he could heal. Here is the drastic turning point for Sesshomaru's character. Not only had this been a humbling experience for him, being beaten by a lowly half-demon, not that he ever actually stopped thinking he was the greatest thing on the planet, but also it left him with a physical reminder of his failure as his arm was missing. In order to heal, Sesshomaru found his way to a secluded forest to lay under a tree for a few days to rest. In this time of vulnerability, he was found by a young girl named Rin who was covered in scratches and bruises and was seemingly unable to talk. She visited Sesshomaru every day, keeping watch to make sure he was still alive and bringing him food or anything else that he might need, despite constantly being turned away by the demon. One day, out of either boredom, pity, or curiosity, Sesshomaru asked Rin where she had gotten those bruises. Instead of answering, she just smiled and looked genuinely happy that he was talking to her. And this is the first real instance of Sesshomaru taking an interest in anything or anyone other than himself. Even while his younger brother had been bound to a tree for 50 years, he didn't bat an eyelash or try to help in any way. However, this young, human girl who had tried to look after him while he was weak had somehow left an impact. Once he is healed, he wandered off towards the smell of wolves and eventually finds his way to Rin. She had been killed and left for dead. And here is where we find the true power of Sesshomaru's Tenseiga, the ability to cut down the demons of the underworld and bring back those who have died. He calls it a test, however, regardless of his intentions, Sesshomaru's first act of kindness in the series is bringing back the young, and I cannot stress this enough, human girl back to life. From here on, Rin joins Sesshomaru, and as their journey continues, she becomes his greatest treasure. And this kind of comes to a climax in the scene where Rin is killed and brought into the underworld by a large demon. Without hesitation, Sesshomaru jumps into a portal to follow her. Here, his mother opens a path home for him, telling him that it's his only chance to escape. If he continues into the darkness, he'll never be able to return. However, because Rin is still lost in the dark, he refuses and continues journeying deeper and deeper into the underworld. Honestly, there's a lot going on here, and it can be kind of difficult to gauge how Sesshomaru's feeling, so I'm not sure if he continues solely because he's refusing to leave without her and is willing to sacrifice himself for her, or if he just believes he's so powerful that he could escape the underworld and there's no need to worry anyways. Regardless, Rin has died a second time, and the Tenseiga isn't working when he finds her. Sesshomaru drops his sword while holding Rin's corpse and laments that he let her die while trying to make himself stronger, saying nothing could ever be worth the cost of Rin's life. Let me just remind you, this is the cold-blooded, ruthless demon, Lord Sesshomaru, who is heartbroken for letting a human child die. His mother informs him that he isn't a god, and even with the power of Tenseiga, he can't just save someone's life infinite times. After hearing this, his face goes completely stoic, which isn't a drastic change, but his servant Jockin begins weeping. Sesshomaru's mother asks why the imp is crying, and he explains that Sesshomaru would never allow himself to show weakness, and as such, he must cry in his stead. Hearing this, his mother places an amulet on Rin and gives her one final chance at life. Now, at no point in the series does Sesshomaru stop being a complete powerhouse badass. He still considers himself to be leagues more important and powerful than almost anything around him. However, Rin has opened him up to the idea of caring for others, and he places her life above his own. And he begins to understand how his father and brother could come to love humans, and even towards the end of the series, he begins to work with and accept Inuyasha, if only a little bit. And on the same note of characters becoming more human or moral, there's one last villain that I want to take a look at in this video. In the early days of Dragon Ball Z, we were introduced to a ruthless Saiyan on his way to conquer the Earth. And on the way to the Earth, we watched him come across a planet called Arlia that was filled with sentient bug monsters. And he absolutely devastated them. This was our first glimpse of the general of the Saiyan army, Nappa. Just look how bald he is. Look how veiny he is. I'm not even sure what's happening to his body and his frame, but look how magnificent he is. Truly, a monster unlike any other. No, but really we're going to be talking about Vegeta, obviously. Vegeta is the prince of all Saiyans. He shows no hesitation in destroying bugs, people, or planets in his path. Even when his closest ally Nappa is defeated in a battle by Goku and reaches out to Vegeta for help, Vegeta shows no sympathy, instead grabbing Nappa by his hand, tossing him into the air, and killing his ally for showing weakness. Saying that Vegeta was cold-blooded is understating things by a ton. Even Sesshomaru wouldn't kill his own followers, although, to be fair, Dio probably wouldn't hesitate. Vegeta is an extremely proud character, and showing weakness is just unacceptable to him, which is why losing to Goku was incredibly frustrating. Anyways, we're gonna move forward an arc, and we find ourselves on Namek, preparing to battle the Tyrant Frieza. We get a bit of Vegeta's backstory, learning that the Saiyans used to work for Frieza, and when they had become too powerful and started to pose a threat, the space dictator destroyed their planet and killed all of the Saiyans except for a few who were off-planet at the time, or who happened to warp through time, but whatever. Either way, not a lot of them survive. And learning all of this seems to make Vegeta a more sympathetic and tragic character. Is he still a total dick? Absolutely. But did he also lose all of his friends and family to Frieza, making his actions a little bit more understandable to those watching? Also, absolutely. On top of this, having him on a parallel track with the heroes of the story in a journey to battle against Frieza really helped this shift in how we saw Vegeta. This was pushed even further when we saw him lose to Frieza, and with his final words tell Goku that he's the one who will become a Super Saiyan, and that he will be able to defeat Frieza and avenge their race. More or less a passing of the torch from the incredibly proud Vegeta. Now, once Frieza is defeated, Vegeta is brought back to life and decides to live his life on Earth to get some of Bulma's booty, and probably for other reasons as well. During the Cell Saga, we meet up with his son from the future, Trunks, and the arc largely consists of Trunks saying, "Oh my god, look how strong these androids are," and Vegeta saying, "Oh my god, look how strong I am." Each time Trunks questions Vegeta's power, Vegeta seems to push himself even further to prove himself powerful out of pure pride. He challenges the androids, and that went, well, he survived at least. And then we have this battle against Cell, where Vegeta has him up against the wall and Cell taunts him, saying that his victory wouldn't really matter because Cell isn't complete, goading him on, saying, "Just imagine the great battle that we could have if I was complete." And of course, Vegeta's pride gets the better of him, and he lets Cell become complete, only to be completely shut down by this monster's strength. So let's take a quick look at what's happened so far. Vegeta, a ruthless monster of a Saiyan, shows up on Earth, and basically shows people as bluntly as possible that he is heartless and has next to no humanity left in him at this point, other than a great camaraderie with Nappa. Then he kills Nappa. He gets beaten by Goku, and then we see a kind of turning point in his character when he's killed by Frieza and has to admit that Goku is the final chance of the Saiyans, not himself. And at his first chance to prove himself as a Super Saiyan, he's shut down pretty hard. Vegeta's whole arc so far has been on a downward spiral. Essentially, the only thing that's gone well for him at this point is that he's started a family with Bulma, and they have a future together. A future where he's killed by androids, and a present where he's too weak to stop them. We've seen him turn from a savage monster into a tragic figure who's honestly just trying his best, and who's unable to come to terms with his own weakness. But his story doesn't end there. In the Majin Buu saga, we see all of Vegeta's frustration, anger, and envy culminating into a single point where he decides to join Babidi for more power. His developmental climax in this saga comes when he's standing with Goten and his son Trunks, and he tells Trunks to take care of his mother and hugs his son for the first time, knowing that he's about to go sacrifice himself in an attempt to kill Majin Buu. He knocks out both children, giving them to Piccolo for safety, before charging into the battle, where he explodes in one final blast in an attempt to destroy the monster. Vegeta's arc shows a prideful, angry, and monstrous person who is humbled over and over again, repeatedly being beaten down and falling behind Goku. He learned to love and care for others, and eventually comes to terms with the fact that he's made mistakes in his life and sacrifices himself to try and protect his loved ones and atone for his sins. All of these characters undergo a slow learning process in which their pride is challenged over and over again until they're forced to make a decision. In Dio's case, we see a man give into the darkness, both literally and metaphorically casting away his humanity, to ascend from his tragic life and gain the power he needs to make his dreams a reality. A lust for dreams that even his son takes up several sagas later. In Sesshomaru, we saw a demon who thought himself above everyone and everything around him. However, when he is defeated by his younger brother, he finds support in Rin, and through her he's able to appreciate and care for and even protect others. And finally, in Vegeta, we see a ruthless fighter who's humbled and defeated until he's so desperate for power that he essentially makes a deal with the devil, or at least the devil's much smaller, more ballsack-shaped friend. However, Vegeta eventually comes to understand the error in his path and does all he can to compensate for the mistakes that he's made. And I think that this ability to falter, as well as the ability to pick yourself up and try again, and to be a better person and make up for the mistakes of your past, is probably the most human thing that someone can do. We all slip up from time to time, and it's what you decide to do after you fall that lets you follow a path towards becoming a hero or just another demon. The humanity of all three of these characters show a dramatic shift throughout the story, and honestly it's this level of growth, be it positive or negative, that really just makes them stand out far beyond other villains like, for example, Frieza in Dragon Ball Z, to me at least. But of course, that's just my opinion. Let me know who your favorite villains are in the comments section down below and why you love them so much. What do you think makes a great villain? Do you prefer the ones who are just these big, insurmountable objects that your heroes need to overcome? Or do you prefer the ones who might not be the most powerful, but who have the best character arc? I'm looking forward to reading all the comments about this in the section down below. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more. This is probably the first video I've made specifically for this channel in, I don't know, half a year now, and it's really nice to actually be uploading back here again. And with that in mind, I hope you all stay excellent.